I've been married to my wife for 7 years. Initially, everything was fantastic. She felt like my soulmate, and I believed I was hers. We shared so many common interests: sports, entertainment, social issues which I'll delve into later, holiday destinations, and more. Those were genuinely happy times. However, over time, she started becoming more aloof and even a bit cold. To give you a bit more context, we had a solid relationship for 5 of those 7 years. I always felt like I was the center of her world, just as she was mine. We enjoyed going out with friends, and I could always catch her smiling at me while we chatted. She took care of me when I was unwell, and I did the same for her. She had my back in everything. She was my anchor, my best friend, my everything. We did so much together: hiking, camping, visiting wildlife resorts, catching football games. We had a deep passion for each other. I never wanted her to change. From the moment I met her, she was stunning. Brunette curls, a dazzling smile, and an incredibly kind demeanor. She always made me feel special, and I never once felt insecure around her, but more on that later. As I mentioned, the first 5 years were great, but things began to shift when her new supervisor, Liam, he's around 30, started at her job. At first, she came home and talked about him a lot, saying he was funny and had a way of making people feel good. It was odd because usually she would come home and ask about my day first, then share hers. But suddenly, it was all about Liam right off the bat. Initially, I shrugged it off, thinking she was just excited about someone new at work after seeing the same faces for years. Liam seemed like a breath of fresh air to her. As the weeks went by, she grew more distant and secretive. She started attending more work nights out, which hadn't been a big deal before. However, there was one night when we were supposed to go to a mutual friend's house for drinks. Our friend Ethan, he's 32, had been diagnosed with a severe disease, and my wife, who had always been a rock, was empathetic and supportive. When we heard about Ethan's condition, we didn't hesitate to offer our support. The night we planned to visit him, my wife was running late from her work event. I tried calling her several times but got no answer, and my texts went unanswered too. After waiting for a while, I decided to head over to Ethan's on my own. Ethan and I talked about how he was dealing with everything. My heart went out to him. He's such a good guy, and it felt cruel for him to go through this. When I got home, I was furious. My wife still wasn't back, and there were no missed calls or texts from her. I couldn't believe it. I started to worry that she might have been in an accident, so I called her colleague, Olivia, she's 28, who I get along with. I asked if Kelly, that's my wife, was still out with her. Olivia told me she had left, and it was just Kelly and Liam who stayed out. I was livid. How could she choose to spend time with a guy she barely knew over supporting a friend like Ethan, who she had known for years? I kept telling myself there had to be some reasonable explanation for all this. I waited for her to come home, and when she finally did, I was sitting in the living room just staring at her. She looked at me and asked, "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" I couldn't believe her nonchalance. I just said, "Ethan." She looked taken aback and quickly apologized, saying she got caught up with work friends and lost track of time. Her expression seemed sincere. Considering how close she was to Ethan, maybe she did just forget. Still, I pressed on. "Who was out with you?" She listed off the usual names: Olivia, Ava, she's 30, and others. I couldn't help but ask, "Not Liam?" She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Oh yes, he was there too." Remembering what Olivia had told me, I asked, "Did everyone stay out until the end?" She responded, "Yeah, it was a good night." The next day I was furious but kept it to myself. My wife had never lied to me before, nor had she ever let someone down like that. I couldn't wrap my head around her ditching our sick friend for a guy she'd just met. Over the next few days, she grew even more distant. She started coming home later and wasn't affectionate anymore. I tried to chalk it up to a heavy workload, but she was always glued to her phone. I asked her who she was texting all the time. She said it was just a friend from work. I pushed, "Is it Liam?" She snapped back, "No, but what's the problem if it is?" I'd never seen her so defensive. I couldn't hold back any longer and said, "Because you never shut up about him. He's only been working with you for less than a month, and you seem to worship him. Your eyes light up when you talk about him, so much so that you forgot about Ethan." I knew I'd hit a nerve. She shot back, "I don't idolize Liam. He's just a nice guy and a friend, and I've already apologized to Ethan." That wasn't enough for me. Later that night, after she fell asleep, I checked her phone. And there it was, full of explicit messages between them. I took screenshots for proof. A week went by and nothing changed. The late nights, the lack of affection. I confided in a friend who suggested I might be overreacting and should try doing something special for her, like a surprise dinner. I thought it was worth a shot. So I texted my wife to see if she was free after work, and she said she was. It felt like a positive conversation. I went all out, making dinner, getting a nice bottle of wine, and even buying flowers. But when she got home, she looked upset and said she was really sorry. But a friend from work had planned a surprise birthday party for a colleague, and it was the only night they could do it. I felt a wave of frustration and anger as she turned around and left right after. This was the breaking point. After months of suspicion, I needed undeniable proof. Asterisk. You might be thinking, dude, how could you not see the signs? Well, I did, but I was clinging to hope. Hope that I was wrong, that this was all just a bad dream. Honestly, I was terrified of what I'd find out, but I had to know for sure. So though I wasn't proud of it, I placed a tracker in her car. I pretended to work late that evening so she wouldn't see me. I watched from a distance as she came home, only to leave again shortly after. I followed her out of town until she pulled into a secluded parking lot. She sat there until another car pulled up beside her. It was Liam. She got out and climbed into his car. It was painfully obvious what was going on. I recorded her getting into his car for evidence. For the next few days, she pretended like everything was normal. I knew she had no clue that I was aware of what was going on, but she went about her routine as if nothing had changed. She smiled at me, even held my hand at breakfast. Then she left for work. I had the day off, so I decided to dig around on her laptop to see if I could find anything suspicious. Unfortunately, I found nothing. But while rummaging through her drawers, not my finest moment, I discovered an iPad hidden at the bottom of one drawer. It wasn't mine, so I figured it must be hers. Luckily, it didn't require a password. Maybe she forgot to lock it, but I got lucky. I powered it on and started looking through it. This is where the real pain set in. I checked her text conversations, but they were clean. However, what I found next is something I will never forget. There was a folder filled with pictures of my wife in various explicit poses, meant for Liam. There were so many images, but it didn't stop there. There were videos, graphic videos. I know I shouldn't have watched them, but I did. The footage showed Liam and my wife together in intimate moments, with my wife clearly enjoying herself. And it didn't end there. There were also videos of her with another woman and another man, with Liam present. The man was particularly revolting. He had vile tattoos representing hateful groups. It was clear that Liam shared those abhorrent views, which only made it worse. I couldn't believe it. My wife, who used to abhor bigotry, was involved with a man who not only held such views, but also seemed to endorse them. This was a woman who despised any form of prejudice, and so did I. So why was she involved with someone like that? What did she find appealing about him? Seeing her so willingly complicit was devastating. Throughout our marriage, we'd talked about fantasies but never acted on them. As a man, I'd been open to ideas like threesomes, but she'd always said she was uncomfortable with such things and wouldn't participate. I accepted that without question because I loved her. Seeing her engage in activities she had always refused with me was excruciating, truly painful. I watched all the videos I know. It was a mistake, and copied them and the photos to my laptop as proof of her infidelity. That's what mattered to me now, having undeniable evidence. I was determined to end our marriage. I couldn't understand why she chose him over me, especially when he represented everything she claimed to despise. I decided to confide in Ethan about everything. He's a good friend and an even better person. He was shocked that it was my wife involved. He was disgusted, but he had also noticed the changes in her. I told him I wanted a divorce, and he understood. He said I had enough evidence to back me up and advised that confronting her or Liam would be pointless because she had clearly made her choice. He suggested that I needed a fresh start, to find someone who was genuine, not a facade of the woman I thought I married. Like me, Ethan despises racists, and he was appalled by my wife's actions, especially since he had known her longer than I had. After talking to Ethan, I finally felt in control. For months, I had felt like she was running the show. I was terrified of finding out the truth and didn't confront her more directly out of fear of the outcome. At the time, I was torn between trying to make it work or walking away. But after seeing the videos, pictures, and texts, I now knew exactly what I needed to do. I went to see a lawyer to start the divorce process. I'd had enough. My wife was still acting as if everything was perfectly normal, constantly on her phone, staying out late, presumably with Liam. I didn't care. I had to wait 3 weeks for the paperwork to be finalized. When the divorce papers finally arrived, I decided it was time to move out. Luckily, we were renting, and our lease was set to expire in 3 months, which meant I was prepared to pay for that time. Anyway, I was eager to get out. The day arrived, and she went off to work. I told her I had to go in later to cover a staffing shortage. She just shrugged and said, okay, no goodbye hug or kiss, though that had been absent for months, so I was used to it. She left, and I packed up my essentials. I placed the divorce papers and my wedding ring on the kitchen table. That was it. I moved in with my university friend Noah, who lived in another city. I was thankful for his hospitality, but even more grateful that it was far from her, from the city, and from our shared social circle. I wanted nothing to do with any of it. I told my parents what happened, and while they were shocked, they completely understood. Of course, I left out the more personal details. There was no need to burden them with that. Right now, all I could think about was the sense of freedom. I assumed my wife would be relieved too, since it was obvious Liam was who she wanted. I hoped for a swift divorce. Later that night, my phone started blowing up with calls and texts from my wife. I was taken aback because I honestly thought this was what she wanted as well. But I couldn't have been more wrong. I didn't answer her calls. I had no interest in talking to her. Her messages were all variations of, "I'm sorry, I love you, and please, can we talk?" This went on for hours. I eventually blocked her number and deleted all my social media accounts. I checked in with my lawyer about the divorce papers, but my wife hadn't signed them. She reached out to me via email, continuing her apologies and begging to talk. I replied, stating clearly that I only wanted the divorce. Her response was that she didn't want one, claiming I was the only man she loved and that Liam meant nothing to her. It was amusing, really, because I hadn't told her why I left, but she clearly knew. Seeing her plead for forgiveness, driven by guilt, was oddly satisfying. I spoke to Noah, who assured me I could stay as long as I needed. I was grateful for his support. However, he mentioned that I'd eventually have to face her. He said leaving without getting answers would only leave me with unresolved issues, and no matter how hard I tried to avoid it, I'd need to confront them eventually. Inside, I disagreed with Noah. Why should I talk to her? She had shown so little regard for my feelings over the past few months. She only seemed to care about her sick friend Ethan. So why should I bother talking to her now? Deep down, I knew I was being stubborn. I was also angry that my wife was trying to reconcile. I honestly thought she would sign the papers and move on with Liam. This situation had me confused, and now she wanted to meet before signing. I had an excellent therapist with whom I discussed the affair, the pictures, the videos, everything. I mentioned that my wife wanted to meet before finalizing the divorce. My therapist was blunt. She pointed out that by leaving without giving her a clear reason, I was subconsciously hoping she would beg and feel remorse. I kept telling myself she wouldn't care, but deep down I wanted her to. I wanted her to experience the pain she caused me. Meeting her would give up some of my control, and my therapist was right. She also advised that if I chose to meet her, I needed to ask the tough questions, even if the answers were painful. I had questions that needed answering, and I wasn't moving on at all. I was avoiding facing the fact that the last 7 years might have been a lie. My therapist's honesty was harsh, but necessary. That was 2 days ago. My wife is insistent on meeting, saying she won't sign the papers without a conversation first. I talked it over with my parents and close friends. My dad suggested I could force the issue, but it might take months. However, if she's willing to sign after we talk, though there are no guarantees, it could be worth it. Noah agreed with this approach. So I've decided to meet with my wife. To say I'm nervous is an understatement. I'm not even sure where to begin. I moved back to my old place. Although living with Noah was great, I knew I needed to return to my own space eventually. Since my soon-to-be ex is still in our house, I rented a flat just outside of town. I informed her of my move and she seemed pleased. However, I made it clear that I would not be living with her. She understood, although she tried to pitch the old, "we can sleep in separate rooms" idea. I wasn't interested in that. I also made it clear that I wouldn't disclose my new address to her, even though she tried to pry it out of me. We both wanted to meet, so we set up a time and place. I chose a neutral spot, a location near the beach where there would be people around but not too crowded, just in case things got heated, which I certainly didn't want. I preferred to have the meeting outside, just the two of us. I made it clear that I would be recording the conversation, which I did. Before the meeting, I sent her an email outlining some strict ground rules. I made it clear that if she didn't follow these rules, there would be no chance for reconciliation. The rules were straightforward. 1. Answer every question I ask with complete honesty. 2. No vague answers like, "it just happened," or "I'm not sure." I want detailed, clear responses. 3. If she storms off without answering every question, that's it. No chance for reconciliation. 4. She must answer even if the truth is painful for me to hear. 5. Don't be late. If you are, no reconciliation. We had agreed on the time and place for our meeting. Now it was just a matter of waiting until I could head back to my flat. The next day, I caught up with some friends. They treated me with the same level of support and concern as they would Ethan, which I understood and appreciated. However, it seemed, as I expected, that word of our breakup had spread. I questioned how everyone knew, considering I had only shared the news with a few close people. But naturally, my wife must have told her family and friends, setting off a chain reaction. Of course, they didn't know the full story. None of them knew about the texts, pictures, or videos. Not even my wife was aware I had all this evidence. She only thought I left because she was spending too much time with Liam. She was under the impression that her time with him upset me, leading to our breakup. I updated my therapist about the meeting. She suggested I ask specific questions to get a clearer understanding of what happened. I'll explain more on that later. It was the day of the meeting, and I was more anxious than I had anticipated. It wasn't about wanting her back. It was the act of seeing her that unsettled me. The thought of her, and by extension Liam, was overwhelming. I feared losing my focus and control. I arrived at the beach early, really early. The weather was perfect, sunny with people taking their morning strolls. I had chosen a good spot. Then, unexpectedly, I saw my soon-to-be ex walking toward me. She was smiling, looking great, definitely dressed up for the occasion. Although she seemed a bit worn out and stressed, I wasn't about to feel any sympathy. She came up and tried to hug me, but I put my arm out to indicate I wasn't interested. She gave me a look that seemed to say, "I understand." We sat down, and she attempted to start some small talk, but I wasn't having any of it. I had my phone recording and began. Me. When did you first kiss him? Her. The first week, on Friday. Me. When did you first sleep with him? Her. The same day, Friday. Me. Where? Her. At his place. Me. Did you ever do it on my bed? Her. Does it matter? I stared at her and reminded her about the email, insisting she answer everything as stated. She nodded, tears starting to form. Me. When did this happen? She explained it happened several times while I was out. Our neighbors saw him but assumed he was just a work colleague and thought nothing of it. She kept apologizing, but I stopped her with a raised hand. I moved on to my other questions. Me. Did you tell him about me? About being married? Her. Yes, but at the time it was all a blur. My therapist had asked me to pose a specific question, and this was it. Me. When you first met Liam, how soon did he start asking about me? Her. What do you mean? Me. It's simple. When you talked, what did he want to know about me? Did he ask how long we'd been married? Whether we were happy? Her. After a pause. Yes, he did ask about our marriage and if we were happy. Why? Me. Didn't that strike you as odd? You meet a guy you barely know, and he's asking personal questions about our marriage? Her. No. I thought he was just being curious. I didn't think it was weird. This will become more relevant later. After addressing a number of smaller questions, I decided to tackle the more significant issues. I approached the topic of the videos and pictures subtly, starting with a reference to a local incident. Given Liam's and his friends' views, I aimed for a softer entry. Me. Did you hear about the incident last Thursday? Her. What incident? Me. The bigots who attacked the shopkeeper and vandalized his store, spraying hateful graffiti everywhere. Her. That's awful. Me. Yeah, it is. I can't stand racists. Can you? I let my question hang in the air. Her expression shifted from confusion to realization. She understood that I knew about the pictures and videos. She began to cry, tears streaming down her face for about 5 minutes. I pressed on. Me. Why would you even go near men like that? Her. Red-faced from crying, struggling to compose herself. It's not what it looks like or what you think. Me. What do you expect me to think? What was it about this man that would make you disrespect your grandfather's legacy and want to? Or bail on your friends, and treat me like I'm worthless? At this point she was visibly shaking, her eyes watery, but she answered. Her. He was the new boss in our department. He was open and funny. He made people feel good about themselves. A lot of women liked him. Even from the start he had that effect. But when he showed an interest in me, I felt like he chose me. Me. What does that even mean? Her. You want honesty, and I need to be honest. When we started talking, he made it clear he was only interested in me. I interrupted. Me. After just a few days? Her. Yes, that's what I'm saying. He had this way of making someone feel happy, and more. I felt great when he looked at me from across the office when he said, "You're the only interesting person here." I felt like he chose me. 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 What? Her. I know it sounds pathetic. I feel pathetic and weak. But you have to understand. When he first started, he was good-looking, confident, and suave. He had an aura about him. When he smiled, I melted. She continued. He could have had anyone at the office. All the girls wanted him. They talked about him constantly. I never thought he would pick me. Me. Wait, you wanted to be picked? Her. Not initially. I thought it would be harmless flirtation. But he made it clear he wanted more. And that was it. Me. What was it? Her. He was like a drug I couldn't shake off. I know it's pathetic, but when he talked to me and gave me compliments, I was stunned and flattered. My confidence shot up. I thought, this man could have anyone, but he's telling me it's me he wants. Me. What was it about you? I don't understand. Her. He made me feel like I was the one he was meant to be with. I know it's not what you want to hear, but I'm being honest. Continuing our conversation, I decided to delve deeper into her feelings about Liam. Me. I can't deny I was attracted to him. It was obvious. I see that now. Me. Wait, you thought you were hiding it well? Her. At the time, yes. In the beginning, he showered me with compliments. Other women were jealous of me, and I got a rush from it. I liked it. The more I saw of him, the more I wanted. Me. Wanted. Her. Wanted to feel like a queen. I know you treated me well and I was lucky. But Liam was on another level. I got a thrill from seeing other women envious of me. Her confession was raw and painful. She continued. Her. I thought I was incredibly lucky to have him, but the longer I was with him, the more he changed and I couldn't stop it. Me. What do you mean? Her. He was specific about what he wanted. He got to know me, but pushed me to do the opposite of what I liked. The videos and pictures were his idea. And yes, I know about his friend and his vile ideology, but I didn't want to challenge them because I didn't want to upset him. He'd say, if you can't make me happy, someone else will. He had this, do you know how lucky you are? Attitude. I panicked and went to extreme lengths to keep him happy. Nothing else mattered. I did everything he asked and you saw that. Me. Of course I did. And about the fantasies. Her. I know. But as I said, he was a drug I couldn't shake off. The more I saw him, the more I wanted. He made me believe you were the problem. He made me think you didn't respect me and were holding me back. I know now that's not true, she said, tears streaming down her face again. But that's why I did everything he told me to do. Even when he criticized you, I couldn't fight back because I was hooked. Me. And that makes it okay? The way you treated me? Bailing on dinners, abandoning camping plans? Seriously? Her. No, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it because I know how I treated you. I was terrible to you, and I'll never forgive myself. But I did it. I knew I was hurting you, but I couldn't stop. He told me I deserved more than you, that I should be treated like a queen. The more I indulged in high-class restaurants, VIP theater shows, and fancy jewelry, the more I resented you. He always mentioned you and your failures, and I bought into it. I thought you failed me and he didn't. I know it's not true, but he was so influential, and I believed everything he said. Her voice was filled with regret. Her. It was only when I saw the divorce papers and the wedding ring that something clicked. I know you don't believe me, but I ended things with Liam immediately. I know I don't deserve credit, but I'm truly ashamed of what happened. I can't imagine what it was like for you. I know I neglected you and made you feel worthless. I only saw it clearly after seeing the papers. I'm ashamed that I chose that vile man over you." I looked at her, taken aback by her seemingly sincere answers. I replied, "Me. Aside from your affair, you know what the problem is? From the beginning, you wanted the affair because you felt chosen by him. You said he was a drug, but millions of people get themselves out of drugs. They realize they have a problem and get help. You didn't. You carried on. The only reason you're here now is because I'm your safety net, and now it's gone. There's no way a spouse can claim to love you while making you feel inadequate." Her. "I didn't." Me. "Yes, you did. For 11 months, you made me feel worthless. You saw me eating more, becoming reclusive, and losing myself. Meanwhile, you were going out every night, hitting the gym, buying new clothes, being a different person. You came home and looked at me with disgust. You didn't let me touch you or anything. You gave me nothing but emotional abuse." Her. "Abuse?" Me. "Yes, abuse. Maybe you didn't realize it, but you did. My best friend and soulmate made me hate myself." I didn't finish my sentence, but the pain was clear. Her tears flowed heavily as she apologized profusely. I had to remind her to breathe as people around us started noticing. Once she composed herself, she continued pleading, insisting it was Liam who fed her toxic thoughts against me. I had one final question for her. Me. "Do you love him?" Her. "No, I don't. I know you won't believe me, but I actually hate him, as much as I hate myself." After a few hours of intense conversation, she left, repeating that everything she said was true and that I was the love of her life. I sat by the beach, reflecting on our discussion. The sudden shift in her behavior after meeting Liam made me wonder if she had been manipulated or conditioned in some way. It seemed to fit with what my therapist had suggested. My therapist had theorized that Liam might have sociopathic tendencies. She explained, "It's clear that Liam had an agenda when he asked about your marriage so early on. Sociopaths like to manipulate and control. By targeting your wife, he saw a challenge. He knew you were happily married and solid, so he made it his goal to create a rift and destroy your lives. He wouldn't have pursued a single woman. The challenge and control were crucial for him. He manipulated your wife, and through her, he affected you, your friends and family. He turned your wife into someone she wasn't and made sure she did things against her own values. He also influenced you to become a depressed recluse." She continued, "That's why you didn't confront her immediately after discovering the texts and videos. You lacked confidence because of Liam's manipulation. If you had confronted them, your wife might have taken Liam's side, and he would have won. Sociopaths thrive on creating suffering and lack empathy. They enjoy seeing others in distress." I couldn't help but wonder if there was truth to this. Was my wife a victim of a sociopath? It seemed plausible, yet part of me was indifferent. I kept questioning who this man was and how he had managed to cause such devastation. He was the complete package, a successful boss with confidence and a great physique. He had an undeniable presence that turned heads. But maybe, just maybe, my wife did end things with him the day I left. After our meeting, my neighbors mentioned that Liam had repeatedly come to my house, demanding to see my wife. His behavior became erratic, almost like an abusive partner when he couldn't handle rejection. My therapist suggested this was typical of someone with sociopathic tendencies who can't accept losing control. I contacted HR about the affair, and it turns out others had complained as well. Liam left shortly after our conversation, and my wife left her job before facing further consequences. She's now staying with her parents and seeking help from a psychologist, which she definitely needs. Her family and friends have urged me to meet with her again, but I don't see that happening. She needs to focus on her recovery. The divorce will be finalized in a few weeks. Some people speculated that she wouldn't sign the papers after our meeting, but I needed to understand why she did what she did. Do I feel better? In some ways, yes. Her honesty, or as much as I can believe in the pattern of the affair, makes sense. My wife asked if there's any chance for reconciliation in the future. I've thought about it. Even if she was manipulated, how could I ever trust her again? If I took her back, I'd constantly compare myself to him and feel inadequate. She assures me that I've always been her soulmate, but even if that's true, our relationship would never be the same. The moral of this story is that cheating is profoundly damaging. It hurts the partner more than the cheater can ever understand. Cheaters are selfish, and only own up to their actions when confronted with undeniable evidence. I've decided not to marry again. The damage from this affair has deeply affected me, leaving me with feelings of inadequacy. I'm working on myself, hitting the gym, hiking, and camping with friends. I'm trying to stay active and move on, but there's still anger and frustration. Why did it have to be her? Why did he choose her? These questions are ultimately pointless because the damage has been done. I'm trying to move forward while holding on to my job and social circle. I refuse to be a victim by relocating far away. My therapist says healing takes time, and I'm trying to be patient. After meeting my wife at the beach, my mind was in turmoil. I continued to see my therapist, trying to process the flood of emotions and revelations. I also learned that my wife was seeing a psychologist at a private hospital, paid for by her parents. I stumbled upon this information while hiking alone. As I walked through a shallow stream, I heard someone calling my name. It was my wife's parents. I was apprehensive about seeing them, especially after the recent meeting with their daughter. My thoughts raced. What did she tell them? Did she lie or badmouth me? But it turned out they hadn't. Her mother greeted me with a hug, and her father shook my hand. Both of them apologized for what happened, though I assured them they had nothing to apologize for. Her mother suggested we find a bench to talk, and I agreed. Her mother spoke first. She told me that my wife was now under the care of a psychologist. I've known her parents for years and always found them sincere. They then shared their perspective on what had happened with Liam. Before Liam entered the picture, my wife had a passion for drawing, which she shared with her mother and others in a drawing group. This group had been a significant part of her life for years. However, after meeting Liam, she abruptly stopped attending the group and didn't provide a reason. When her mother reached out, my wife responded defensively and rudely, using harsh language she never used before, saying things like, "I don't give a shit about the group," and "It's sad and pathetic like you." Her parents initially thought this behavior was a result of issues between us. They had no inkling of the affair until after I left. When I moved out and went to Noah's, my wife confided in her parents about everything: the affair, the things Liam had made her do, and the manipulation. This revelation shocked them deeply. Her father confronted her so intensely that my wife had a panic attack. For them, it was inconceivable that their daughter, whom they knew as kind and respectful, could be involved in such deceit and cruelty. This conversation brought me back to my therapist's insights about sociopathic behavior. I asked her, "Me, is my wife a victim of a psychopath?" Therapist, "Not a psychopath, a sociopath." Me, "What's the difference?" I admitted my ignorance on this. Therapist, "Psychopaths adapt their personality to fit into different social circles. Sociopaths, on the other hand, don't change themselves but work to change the people closest to them. They mold their victims into negative, vile versions of themselves." Me, "That makes sense." Therapist continued, "Liam clearly manipulated your wife, making her speak disrespectfully to her parents, and influencing her to act in ways that were completely contrary to her true self. He even chose people with extremist views for the videos to further alienate her from her own values." I mean, how can someone have that much control over another person? Are you saying my wife is truly a victim? Therapist, "Yes, it might sound harsh, but sociopaths have an extraordinary level of influence and control over their victims. They are exceptionally skilled at manipulating and dominating those around them." Back with my wife's parents, her mother mentioned that my wife was seeing a psychologist. Her parents seemed both strained and relieved. Strained by the situation, but relieved that their daughter was finally getting the help she needed. A few weeks later, my wife's mother reached out to me. Over the past weeks, we'd been in regular contact, and she proposed a meeting with my wife's psychologist. The idea was for me and her mother to discuss what had been happening with the psychologist. At first, I was unsure if I should agree. After all, we had previously decided that my wife would sign the divorce papers after our last meeting, but something about the situation felt unresolved. Despite my reservations, we agreed to the session. After a few weeks, the psychologist met with me and my wife's mother. My wife waited outside, and the psychologist, with a soft Irish accent, began our discussion. She was blunt, but gentle in her approach. Psychologist, "Your daughter is suffering from PTSD. Her relationship with Liam was abusive, grooming, and controlling from the start." Me, "She got involved with him in the first week. That hardly seems like someone who is fighting for me, I said, my frustration bubbling over. My wife's mother gave me a stern look, silently urging me to let the psychologist continue. Psychologist. Liam had all the attributes of the perfect person. We all have an idea of what that perfect being is. When Liam started at your wife's workplace, he embodied that ideal, not just in your wife's eyes, but in others as well. I know this is difficult to hear, she glanced at me, but your wife was honest. He made her believe he had chosen her. Me. So she forgot she was married? Psychologist, holding up her hand. I'm not condoning her actions. Yes, she found him attractive. However, Liam's manipulation wasn't just about kindness. For less than a year, he conditioned her to believe that he was perfect and that you were not. This intensive grooming led her to genuinely believe this, which is why she treated you so poorly. After the session, we saw my wife waiting in the lobby. She looked up at us with a sheepish smile. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anger, a desire for revenge, and a wish to make her suffer. Yet these feelings didn't dominate. Why? Time had passed and there was something I needed to do, something I had been doing every year. I went to the cemetery to visit Ethan's grave. Ethan had passed away a while back, and I remembered how my wife had struggled at his funeral. Ethan and my wife had known each other since childhood. Even after the affair became public, Ethan had spoken to my wife and forgiven her. At the grave, I sat in silence, lost in thought. Then I noticed my wife arriving and sitting beside me. We exchanged glances, and she began to cry. Despite my previous thoughts of shunning her and being cold, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Today wasn't about us, but about honoring Ethan's memory. For the first time in a long time, I embraced my wife. As time continued, I remained in therapy, and my wife continued seeing her psychologist. One day, I was sitting in a coffee shop, observing people and finding solace in their apparent happiness. My wife approached and set a cranberry juice in front of me. "Here's your cranberry juice," she said, sitting opposite me. We'd been talking for a few weeks now, focusing on rebuilding our communication rather than rekindling our relationship. There was no romance, just an effort to reconnect and understand each other once again. We met again by the lake. My wife had requested this meeting, and I was anxious about what it might entail. Was Liam back? Was something wrong? I arrived early and waited, my mind racing. When she arrived, I immediately asked, "Is everything okay?" She laughed softly and reassured me. "Everything is fine." She handed me a box. "What is it?" I asked, intrigued. "Just open it," she said with a gentle smile. Inside the box was a crest of my family. I looked at her, surprised but touched. "Happy anniversary," she said. Despite everything that had happened, she remembered the significance of family heirlooms to me. But there was more. She handed me another box. I opened it to find a photo album filled with memories of us. Photos of happy times, of Ethan, and of our families. It nearly brought me to tears. She placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "This isn't a feeble attempt to win you back. I bought these because I know how much they mean to you, and so they mean a lot to me now. I understand there has been a lot of hurt, but I want you to know that I love you. I always have and always will." I looked at her, unsure of how to respond. She smiled warmly and then left. I watched her walk away, her smile lingering in my thoughts. I spent the rest of the day walking along the beach. The weather was beautiful, and I treated myself to fish and chips. My wife and I sat on the rocks watching the sea. We talked endlessly about our day, our families, and our friends. It felt surreal to be sharing a moment with her after everything that had transpired. Yet I found myself reflecting on the advice from both the psychologist and my therapist. Psychologist: "How do you feel?" Me: "What do you mean?" Psychologist: "About your wife." Me: "I'm not sure. Initially, I wanted nothing to do with her, but as time has passed, I'm starting to see things more clearly." Psychologist: "Things?" Me: "About my wife and Liam." She leaned forward, her arms resting on the table. "There is no Liam anymore. Your wife has rid herself of him. She has made it clear that she wants to reconcile. This is no longer about him, it's about you. After months of working with her, I can assure you that Liam will never be a threat again." She continued, "I understand your skepticism, but you wouldn't be meeting with her if you didn't still have feelings for her. The question now is whether you follow what you believe is right or let him win. My therapist echoed similar sentiments. The pain from those 11 months had been immense, but time had a way of healing. I had begun to reconnect with my wife in ways I hadn't thought possible. After finishing our meal, we walked slowly along the beach. For the first time in a long while, I did something I hadn't done in ages. I held her hand. She began to cry. I stopped and looked at her, seeing her not as the person who had hurt me, but as the woman I had loved and still loved. In that moment, I saw her clearly. I saw the woman I fell in love with. And with that realization, I embraced my wife, feeling a mix of old love and newfound hope.